Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal the death of Natalia sent shockwaves through Port Charles, leaving the entire town in a state of utter disbelief. No one could have imagined that someone as vibrant and strong as Natalia would meet such a tragic end. For Marco, her only son, the pain of losing her was indescribable. From the moment he received the devastating news, he couldn't escape the flood of memories of his mother. A woman who had been nothing short of a warrior, constantly sacrificing for her family, always putting others before herself. Now, in an instant, she was gone, and Marco felt as though a part of his soul had been ripped away with her. In his grief, Marco found himself unable to move on, unable to accept the reality of her death. The woman who had given him everything, love, strength, and guidance, was gone forever, and nothing could fill the void she left behind. His heart felt heavy with the weight of the loss, and the world around him seemed a little less bright, a little less full of hope. His memories of her now became a bittersweet reminder of the love they shared, and he couldn't fathom a world without her. Lucas, Marco's devoted boyfriend, understood the gravity of the situation and the depth of Marco's sorrow. He knew that facing this immense loss alone would destroy Marco, and so he made it his mission not only to support him emotionally but to help him uncover the truth behind Natalia's death. Lucas, too, was heartbroken, but he recognized that in order to help Marco heal, he needed to uncover the mystery surrounding her passing. What had truly happened to Natalia? Why had she left this world in such a suspicious and unexplained manner? As Marco began to lose hope, Lucas was determined to take matters into his own hands, vowing to bring justice to the woman who had loved him like a son. The initial results of the autopsy sent shockwaves through Marco, Lucas, and the entire town. The medical examiner confirmed that Natalia had not died of natural causes, nor had she simply overdosed on pills and alcohol as initially suspected. The doctor's conclusion that her death was a tragic overdose was not the full story. There were signs that pointed to something far darker, something that suggested foul play. It wasn't just a case of someone losing control over their addictions. Natalia's death appeared to have been orchestrated, a cold and calculated murder disguised as a tragic accident. The findings of the autopsy were like a knife to Marco's heart. The more he thought about the circumstances, the more he realized that his mother's death had not been an unfortunate series of events, it was a deliberate act. He felt his grief transform into a searing anger, a need to find the truth that would give his mother the justice she deserved. The thought that someone had taken her life in such a calculated way, using her struggles against her, tore Marco apart. He couldn't accept that the woman who had fought so hard for him, for their family, had been taken from him in such an underhanded way. As Marco processed this revelation, the anger began to build inside him. Every piece of evidence, every question that arose, seemed to point in the direction of a conspiracy, a plot far deeper than anyone had imagined. He couldn't ignore the whispers that began to circle around Sonny, whose connections and history with Natalia had been strained at best. Could it be that Sonny, with all his power and enemies, had played a role in her death? Could he have been the one to set this deadly plan in motion? Marco refused to believe it at first, but the more he learned, the more he began to suspect that Natalia's death had been a message from those who feared her, from those who needed to silence her. The pain of the truth cut deeper with every new discovery. It was no longer just the loss of a mother, but the loss of a woman who had been taken from this world under the most sinister of circumstances. Marco's desire for justice became an obsession. He couldn't rest, couldn't grieve in peace until he had answers. He vowed to find the person responsible for her death, no matter what it took, even if it meant confronting those closest to him. The idea that someone, perhaps even someone close to him, could have been behind Natalia's death, sent Marco into a downward spiral of suspicion and paranoia. Every interaction, every conversation, felt like a potential clue, every glance could be hiding a lie. Marco's obsession with finding the truth alienated him from those around him, even as Lucas tried to support him through it all. But Lucas knew that Marco's pain was far from over. Until justice was served, Marco would remain lost in his grief, consumed by the need for retribution. As Marco dug deeper, he uncovered a tangled web of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal, threads that connected Natalia's death to a larger, far more dangerous game than he could have ever anticipated. With each revelation, Marco felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was no longer just about avenging his mother's death, it was about exposing a conspiracy that could bring down the most powerful people in Port Charles. Marco knew that finding the truth would come at a cost, but it was a cost he was willing to pay. His mother's life had been stolen from him, and he would stop at nothing to make sure that those responsible paid the price. The search for justice had just begun, and Marco would be the one to lead the charge. Marco's resolve to avenge his mother's death became the driving force of his every action. The loss of Natalia was not just a personal tragedy, it was a violent wound to his very soul, one that would not be left unpunished. Marco could not accept the notion that his mother had died and no one would be held responsible for it. There was no way he would let Natalia's life end as if it meant nothing, as if it were a random, meaningless accident. To Marco, her death was anything but an unfortunate turn of events. It was deliberate. It was orchestrated. And someone powerful, had to pay the price for taking her from him. The more Marco reflected on the circumstances surrounding his mother's death, the more convinced he became that Sonny was somehow involved. Though Marco knew that Sonny did not directly intend to harm Natalia, there was no escaping the fact that his actions and relationships had inadvertently led to her tragic demise. Marco's mind was consumed with the complexities of Sonny's history with Natalia. Their relationship had always been fraught with tension, filled with unresolved issues that had been buried over the years. Natalia had been caught in the crossfire of a conflict that stretched back far longer than anyone had realized. In Marco's eyes, Sonny was at least partially to blame for the disastrous chain of events that led to his mother's death. Even though he couldn't fully pinpoint what exactly had transpired, Marco could not shake the feeling that Natalia's death was more than just the result of a failed relationship or a moment of desperation. There had been something more to it, something hidden beneath the surface that no one had yet uncovered. Marco began to dig deeper into his mother's past, searching for any clue that could shed light on what had happened in the days leading up to her death. He remembered the conversation he had overheard between Jocelyn and Natalia about the latter's plans to leave Port Charles, which seemed to suggest that Natalia had been preparing for some significant departure. It didn't make sense. Why had she been planning to leave? Was she running from something, or someone? Lucas, Marco's loyal and understanding boyfriend, shared Marco's suspicions about Sonny's involvement in Natalia's death. Lucas had always been a trusted confidant, and Marco knew he could rely on him to help make sense of the puzzle. Still, Lucas couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease he felt about Sonny's role in all of this. He had heard rumors from Jocelyn about Natalia's visit to the church just days before her death. Why would she have gone there if she wasn't planning to leave the town? Had she known something was going to happen? Had she been trying to escape before it was too late? These unanswered questions gnawed at both Marco and Lucas, and they knew they had to get to the bottom of it all. As Marco continued his investigation, the signs began to point to something darker, more insidious. Every piece of the puzzle led him to more unsettling conclusions. The idea that his mother had taken her own life was becoming harder and harder for him to accept. It just didn't add up. The manner of her death didn't fit the theory of suicide. It felt too staged, too carefully orchestrated to be a simple act of despair. Marco's gut told him there was more to the story than what was being said. As he pieced together more of the events surrounding her final days, the connections became more evident. It wasn't just a random tragedy. Someone had made sure that Natalia would never be able to expose the truth, someone had silenced her. Marco swore that he would do whatever it took to find the truth, no matter the dangers, no matter the obstacles in his path. His grief, though raw and unrelenting, fueled his desire for justice. He was not just the son of a woman who had been taken too soon, he was a man determined to right the wrongs that had been done to her. He would stop at nothing to uncover the truth and make those responsible pay. The burning desire for justice coursed through his veins, and he could feel it pushing him forward into an ever-deepening abyss of suspicion and mystery. Meanwhile, other events in Port Charles were unfolding that would only heighten the sense of distrust surrounding Marco. He had been at Charlie's pub, where he heroically saved Christina from a blazing fire. But his actions, though noble, only added fuel to the fire of suspicion. He had appeared at the exact moment when the building was burning, and that raised more than a few eyebrows. Sonny and Jason, who had always been wary of Marco due to his ties to Jen Sidwell, immediately began to question whether Marco's involvement in the fire was a coincidence or if it was part of a larger, more dangerous plot. Marco's connection to Jen Sidwell, a man with deep and questionable ties to various factions within Port Charles, made everyone even more suspicious of him. Marco was Sidwell's son, and Sidwell himself had been known to deal in secrets and shady dealings. The thought that Marco might be in on something far bigger than anyone realized didn't sit well with Sonny. His suspicions only grew stronger as he observed Marco's movements and tried to decipher his role in the grand scheme of things. Was Marco involved in his father's schemes? Was he part of a larger plan? Or was he just another pawn in a dangerous game played by those who held the power in Port Charles? Sonny's growing doubts about Marco's innocence were further fueled by Marco's actions in the aftermath of the fire. Despite the fact that Marco had saved Christina, there were still too many unanswered questions about his motives. The more Sonny thought about it, the more convinced he became that Marco was hiding something. It was not just a matter of saving someone from a fire, it was a matter of what Marco knew and what he wasn't telling them. As the web of intrigue around Marco grew more tangled, Marco became more determined to find the truth, no matter the cost. The stakes were higher than ever, and Marco knew that the people behind his mother's death would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. But Marco had made a promise to his mother, to seek justice for her, even if it meant standing alone. As he delved deeper into the heart of the conspiracy, Marco couldn't help but feel that every step he took brought him closer to uncovering a dangerous truth, one that could shatter everything he thought he knew about the people in his life and the world he lived in. Marco's world had shattered completely when he received the news about his mother, Natalia. He had been expecting something, perhaps a heart attack, perhaps a long-standing illness finally catching up with her. But he was never prepared for the reality that would greet him. Natalia, the woman who had been his rock, his guiding force, was gone. He could hardly wrap his mind around it, and every minute that passed after hearing the news felt like a blur of disbelief and crushing pain. The pain of her death was almost unbearable, an oppressive weight that seemed to crush him from all sides. Marco remembered his mother as a force of nature. Strong, resilient, and always willing to sacrifice for those she loved. The memories flooded him, the times she stayed up late, tirelessly working to provide for him, the times she forgave his mistakes, always with a kind smile and a gentle hand on his shoulder. He remembered her laughter, the way she could light up a room, the way she fiercely protected him from the world's cruelties. And now, she was gone. He could not comprehend the finality of it. The thought that he would never hear her voice again, never feel the warmth of her embrace, left him hollow. It was as if part of his soul had been torn out, leaving only emptiness in its wake. Marco's grief was not just about losing his mother, it was the crushing realization that someone had taken her away from him, in the most brutal of ways. The woman who had raised him with love and care was now just a memory tainted with the bitterness of unresolved questions and suspicions. In the midst of his grief, Marco was not alone. Lucas, his devoted boyfriend, understood the depths of his pain. He saw how Marco's heart was being ripped apart by the weight of the loss, and though Lucas shared in the sorrow, he also knew that Marco could not carry this burden alone. There was something more to Natalia's death than just a simple tragedy, something that didn't sit right with Lucas. He knew Marco needed more than just comfort, he needed answers. And Lucas was determined to help him get them, no matter what the cost. Marco's pain had now turned into an overwhelming need for justice. His mother had been taken from him, and no one seemed to care. But Marco refused to let it go. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Her life was worth more than just a passing news story or a brief mention in the obituary column. It mattered. He would make sure the world knew it mattered. The decision was made. Marco was going to find out what happened to his mother, and he was going to make sure whoever was responsible paid the price. There was no other choice. He couldn't just sit back and let it go unpunished. The more he thought about the circumstances surrounding her death, the more suspicious things seemed. He had learned that Natalia had been preparing to leave Port Charles, but for reasons unknown. She had packed a suitcase, had planned to go to the church, and had seemed to be ready to start a new chapter in her life. But that was before she was found dead, before the tragic overdose that had taken her from him. Something didn't add up. Marco had to find out why. Why had she been so determined to leave? And why had she died just before she could escape? These were the questions that tormented him as he lay awake at night, trying to piece together the puzzle of his mother's life and death. The autopsy results shocked Marco to his core. The doctors confirmed that Natalia's death was not a result of a simple overdose. There were traces of other substances in her system, substances that were not supposed to be there. This was not a case of a woman succumbing to her own addictions. No, this was something far more sinister. Natalia's death had been manipulated, orchestrated, and Marco knew in his heart that someone had intentionally taken her life. As he sifted through the evidence, his mind kept coming back to one name, Sonny. Marco had always known that there was tension between Sonny and Natalia, but had it gone deeper than that? Marco's suspicion grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that Sonny's actions, or inactions, had contributed to Natalia's tragic end. It was too easy to point the finger at him. Natalia's past dealings with Sonny had been fraught with conflict. Was it possible that Sonny had pushed her too far? Or perhaps it was more than that. Perhaps someone else, someone powerful, had orchestrated her death, and Sonny was merely a pawn in the game. Lucas, ever the voice of reason, tried to caution Marco. But Marco's resolve was unwavering. He would not let his mother's death become another unsolved mystery. He had to find the truth, even if it meant going up against the most powerful people in Port Charles. Sonny, his family, and even the police, none of them could stand in his way. Marco had one goal, and that was to uncover who had taken his mother's life. As Marco began his investigation, he uncovered disturbing truths. He learned of Natalia's final days, how she had been on edge, how she had been planning to leave. But no one knew where she had gone or why. She had stopped confiding in people, growing increasingly distant in the days leading up to her death. It was almost as if she had known something was coming, something terrible, and she was trying to escape it. Determined to continue his search, Marco visited the hospital where his mother had been brought in after the incident. The moment he entered the emergency room, he was overcome by a wave of grief. He saw her body, lifeless, lying on the bed, and the weight of it nearly crushed him. He couldn't bear to look at her, but he couldn't tear his eyes away. This was the final image of his mother, and it was more than he could bear. With tears streaming down his face, Marco ran out of the hospital, his body shaking with emotion. He couldn't stay there any longer. He needed to escape, to run, to put some distance between himself and the crushing pain that threatened to swallow him whole. But as he ran, something shifted within him. The overwhelming sadness and anger fused into something darker, something more powerful. Marco's mind became a machine focused solely on one thing, revenge. He would find the people who had taken his mother from him. No one, no matter how powerful, would be allowed to stop him. The grief that once felt so paralyzing now fueled him, pushing him forward. With Lucas at his side, Marco delved deeper into the web of secrets that had been carefully concealed by those in power. Every lead, every clue, brought him closer to the truth. But with each step, Marco realized that the path to justice would not be an easy one. There were forces at play, forces far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined, and they would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. But Marco didn't care. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it. He had nothing left to lose. His mother was gone, and he would stop at nothing to make sure her death was avenged.